This is the Comics Alternative Kickstarter, Discovering Corpus, a comic anthology of bodily ailments. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Kickstarter. I'm Derek, and this is the weekly show where I talk with a creator or a creative team about a Kickstarter campaign that is comics related and one that is right up the comics alternative alley. And today I have the pleasure of talking with Nadia Shammas. She is the editor and I guess the curator as well of Corpus, a comic anthology of bodily ailments. Nadia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's begin at a logical place. Describe what Corpus, a comic anthology of bodily ailments, is all about.
So Corpus, a comic anthology of bodily ailments, is about illness in healthcare in every form that it can take. So we've got this wide arrangement of different stories from different approaches about mental illness, physical illness, disability, invisible disabilities, as in disabilities that you just can't obviously see on a person or you wouldn't know immediately, and healthcare experiences like surgeries, recovering from healthcare, and of course medical debt. Mm-hmm. So I kind of noticed that there was this big hole in narratives when it came to illness, and I noticed that from my perspective as a type 1 diabetic. And as I kind of ruminated over this silence, I thought, why don't I create this space that I had wanted to see? And when I first came out with Corpus, the response was so overwhelming that I realized that absolutely this is a thing that so many people want and so many people have been waiting for. And that's why we put it together. I got a great team, and I have a huge arrangement of stories from all kinds of perspectives and all kinds of tones and all kinds of styles. And I really wanted to embrace the fact that corpus obviously is Latin for body, but it also refers to a body of work. And every part of your body is so different, but it makes together a cohesive whole. And so all of these stories make up, hopefully, if I did my job right, a cohesive story of the way that illness can touch or even brush up against our lives.
This is fascinating that it's your own experiences as a diabetic that kind of led you to Corpus. So that's basically the genesis of this project, right? Your own, I guess, medical or bodily issues, and you just wanted to highlight those that you and others may experience through the form of comics.
Exactly. I mean, I love comics. I always have. I always knew that I wanted to work in comics, and I was working and currently am, as a freelance comics editor. And I thought, I think I'm ready to launch my first big project, and what should it be? And around that time when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, my own health issues in a more vague philosophical way, and it just clicked together that no, I should make this about what I want to see in the world, and especially, there's been so much. The reason I was ruminating even about my status as a diabetic was because of the environment of healthcare that we have right now, the way that, healthcare is being talked about. This kind of a lot of people like myself who are chronically ill feel this massive weight and threat over their lives. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of thinking about, it's amazing how, anyone who meets me, there are people who've known me for years who I think I probably forgot to even tell them that I'm diabetic, and they have no idea. I mean, for example, my dad, the church that he goes to, the priest through this project found out I was diabetic, and I've known him for like 10 years. So it's kind of like that, is that when we talk about sick people, we, for some, well, not for some reason. I think a big part of it does have to do with the representation we have. We imagine kind of like this small, tiny group of completely dilapidated people who just want free money. And that is farthest from the truth. I think if people actually sat down to think of how many sick people they actually know, it would shock them. And, we all have a body. And no one gets out of this unscathed, So it's kind of funny to me that we have this culture of silence around illness. And I thought, and all of this, a lot of thought went into Corpus, and on a lot of that, that fire, that motivation, that discontent came into launching this project. And I'm really happy to see that I wasn't alone.
And that's great, because basically what you're doing with Corpus is you're giving voice to those who, for one reason or another, have been more silent, or to a phenomena that has been marked by silence more than, a fuller sense of awareness and understanding.
Absolutely. I mean, I even have talked about in other interviews about the way that diabetes particularly is represented in the media, where it's always the punchline to a fat joke. And what that ends up happening is that it makes a lot of diabetics feel a really insane level of guilt to a disease that already requires, near inhuman perfection to get it totally right. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, I have this term that I talk to with other diabetics. I say diabetic burnout, where you get so guilty and so tired, and that you just kind of stop taking care of yourself because you're like, God, what's the point? And I feel like just kind of knowing that other people face that helps us. But unfortunately, we've kind of been resigned to this place in representation where it's just kind of like boom, boom, tiss. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And in fact, this is a problem with representation across the board. Whenever we do have somebody with a physical disability on a show, it's always like some kind of, heart-wrenching story that's like, oh, look, they did it, and that's kind of ridiculous, because a part of it is, the struggle, and part of it is that, and part of it isn't the struggle. Part of it is just kind of the normal day-to-day. Part of it is just eating breakfast and watching a movie. I mean, for example, I remember when I watched The Theory of Everything, the Stephen King movie, I was actually pretty upset with the way that they handled this brilliant mind, and they kind of made it like, oh, all he wants and all he wishes he could do is just walk. And I'm like, I'm sure he does, but he's had a fuller life than 99% of us. He didn't lose anything in his life, like in terms of ability to live his life to the fullest. This guy went in like a no gravity space simulator. You know what I mean? That it's like Stephen Hawking has done amazingly, and I'm sure that, of course, everybody who wishes that they were one way or another, but like that shouldn't have been the point of the movie. That shouldn't have been the climax of the movie. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to get back to another thing that you had mentioned a moment ago, and that is the sheer variety of art styles that make up, or that will make up, Corpus. I'm looking at your roster of creators, and, well, first and foremost, it's quite long, but also there are quite a number of names there that I recognize, and I think many of the listeners would recognize as well. And by the way, I will put some of the sample art up in the show notes, so our listeners can obviously go to your Kickstarter campaign and back that, of course, but they can also see this on the Comics Alternative website, some of the variety of art here. And so I'm curious how you lined up this impressive array of creators for the project.
Well, I live in New York, and I launched Corpus kind of a few days right before New York Comic Con, where I was going to be attending. I started out with kind of the opening online submissions, through which I received 200, by the way, so people definitely want to see this, or at least be a part of it. People want their stories to be told. And I also, at New York Comic Con, went up to a lot of artists in Artist Alley. I had flyers made, and I spoke to them one-on-one about the intention of the project. And so I would say that, probably half the people on here are people who I had met at New York Comic Con and spoken to, and the other half are people who came themselves and asked to be part of this. And, everybody who's in it, I couldn't have been blessed with a better roster. Everyone is so wildly talented and wildly passionate and generous, and they're working so hard to make Corpus a reality, and I'm really thankful.
Yeah, and in fact, I will also include a list of the contributors in the show notes. And just going through this, it is in many ways made up of people whom we've discussed on the Comics Alternative in the past. People like Christopher Sebela, Ryan King, Vita Ayala, Elaine Will, Teenie Howard, we discussed just recently with Assassinistas. So, yeah, it is a great lineup. So congratulations on getting everyone on board here. Now, you mentioned that you initially got over 200 submissions, and I was wondering what the process was in terms of culling through everything that you'd received. And as an editor, how painful it may have been to include some things but not others.
It really was a Herculean feat in the fact that I felt this enormous weight on me to kind of choose these stories that, were really amazing and told different kinds of illness from different perspectives, whether, we have stories about people who are carers, we have stories about people whose friends have passed away from illness, we have stories where, where it's about elderly family members. We have stories from the perspective of someone being sick themselves, temporarily, something like, we've got a story in there about adult chicken pox, so, and we also have stories about, minor things like peanut allergies. So I really try to be kind of as broad as possible. And I ended up, making this book 60 pages longer than I had originally intended, just because I really couldn't bear to cut down anymore. When I was going through all the submissions, I made list after list. I went through every one. I wrote down the name, the topic, and the page number on a paper, and then I just kept combing through, culling down the list like shorter and shorter and shorter, and until I got to kind of the core that I felt would flow the best and still have the widest range of representation. And it was very difficult. I did not want anyone to feel that they were rejected because I didn't feel as though their story wasn't valid, because that is absolutely not true. It was just, at the end of the day, a space issue, and I can't publish a 500-page book. No printer would take it. So that's just kind of how it went. It took me a long time. It took me until, submissions closed on Thanksgiving, and it took me till the end of the year to kind of finalize it all.
Well, let's talk about some of the specifics of this Kickstarter campaign. Now, you are shooting for a $25,000 goal, and your deadline is Sunday, March 4th at 11:59 p.m. So from when this episode goes up this coming Saturday as we record, and we're recording on February the 20th, there will be just a little over a week, I guess 8 days, for listeners to support or to back Corpus. Now, tell us a little bit about the reward levels. What are some of the basic reward levels? In other words, what are people going to be getting? What can they back it for?
Okay, great. Well, so we have, of course, the digital copy, which is $12, and you'll receive a digital copy that has, and your name will be featured in the acknowledgement section of the back. The most basic pledge level is obviously the physical copy, in which you will get the soft cover as well as a digital copy. And again, every person who pledges will get a thank you in the back of the book. Of course, I also have kind of fun things, like you could choose between, getting a physical copy and an enamel pin for $10 more, or a postcard set that has 3 postcards that feature images from the cover artist, Mark Wang. And those 3 images will also be found in the interior of the book. They are the chapter separators between the physical illness chapter, the mental illness chapter, and the medical experiences chapter. Mm-hmm. We also have an exclusive print by the amazing Jen Vaughn, who did the cover art for The Secret Love of Geeks, which came out last week. And she also does art for Betty and Veronica Vixens and Goosebumps, and she's, so talented, and I was she really knocked it out of the park with this art print, which is the idea of it is invisible disability, where it's 2 people on a bus or on a train waiting to go to the doctor. One person, their illness is obvious, and the other, it's kind of more vague. And I thought that, and it's absolutely gorgeous, as everything she does. We also have, the option to have it all. You could get the digital copy, the soft copy, the print, the pin, the postcard set, and, the whole thing. And then, of course, we go into the commissions, and we do have some commissions from, really great people. We know Philip Seavey is offering commissions. Sue Lee, who worked on the Mine Kickstarter, also offering commissions. And we also have, a lot of artists who are, very kindly offering commissions. We did recently run out from Rebecca Farrow of Lady Castle and Emily Pearson of The Wilds, upcoming The Wilds. They had commissions, but those are gone.
Those are gone. So those went to the people who struck earliest.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
And there are even more reward levels than you mentioned. And so I strongly encourage everyone to check out the Kickstarter page just to see the details about the various rewards levels that you're offering. Now, if someone wanted to find out more about you and your interests in comics, and you mentioned that you also review comics, where, let's say on social media, would you refer people to?
I would definitely refer people. I'm the most active on Twitter. I would refer people to my Twitter, which is Nadia _Shammas, SHAMMAS_, and that's my handle. And I kind of post everything on there. I am working right now in building my website, so hopefully that will be a resource soon.
Okay. And again, as I mentioned a little while ago, the deadline for the Corpus Kickstarter is Sunday, March 4th at 11:59 p.m. We will include a link to your Kickstarter page in our show notes, but if you go to Kickstarter and just do a search on either Corpus or Nadia Shammas, you'll definitely quickly find this Kickstarter to back. Nadia, good luck with everything, and hey, I hope that this turns out to be a great success, not only that you reach your goal, but you significantly surpass it.
Thank you. I hope the same thing.
And I will be back next week with another Kickstarter campaign. Until then, enjoy your weekend.